also in the book, this is you talk about the it's of course you deal with it exhaustively, but you talk about the anti-clerical movement in the form of Reformation that happened in Europe, and that was used by our so-called colonial masters to initiate a kind of anti-Brahmin sentiment in Bharat as well.
Right.
So this notion that the Brahmin is a sort of Indian version of the white master, the white persecutor, is so strong that we see it not just here in India, but also in the West. For example, in the works of people like Isabel Wilkerson, who wrote a book called Caste, The Origin of Our Discontents,
Right.
where she actually clubs caste along with the horrors of the Holocaust and slavery in America.
Right.
So my question is, how do contemporary Bharatiyas, Indians, how can we counter this narrative? Because I actually engaged with somebody online who was promoting this book, and from the West. So it's difficult because they have such strong opinions about this bogeyman called the Brahmin.
Right. This Isabel Wilkerson's book on the caste, according to me, touches such a raw nerve, and it's important for us to discuss this threadbare because it's a hot potato, simply because she happens to be an African American.
Exactly.
Okay. So why is it that they did not use a white Christian to write this book? Okay. Why is it that an African American has been chosen as the author? Because I don't believe that this is an organic effort of an individual. I believe that it's been put together.
Oh, is it?
Okay. Why did you do that? Because you're using a former slave to talk about a future slave. Okay. So therefore, you are using someone whose religious identity you have robbed, and who's not questioning the theft of her identity or religious identity, and who's now limited the entire scope of our discussions about her past to race. And that racial prism is the very same prism which she uses to look at other colonized societies, which have somehow managed to retain their religious identity, which is not Christian.
Very true. Very true.
Okay. So the point is, you have failed as a community to stand up and protect yourself. My sympathies are with you. I will not kick you for having gone through that, and I will not laugh at you for what you've been through. You have gone through perhaps the worst of genocides, but I do believe that today you have not only converted to the entire worldview of the colonizer, your former master, but you're asking the rest of us who've managed to successfully stave off that particular slavery to also convert to his worldview. And you have become a paid ambassador of that particular initiative by imposing the ethnocentrism of the white Christian European and the Westerner on our societies. That is the first response to that book. Okay. Now, I'm sure that there are better qualified people who have done extensive research on caste, who are much better placed to respond to everything that that book contains. But the broadest possible response, which is most important, is the weaponization of race and its imposition on an artificial construct called caste to understand Varna and Jati. Okay, so that serious conflation is something that I try to address in certain parts of the book. Second is the reason why this is important is a lot of our, let's say, our family members fled India because they wanted to run away from the reservation system, and they wanted to find greener pastures and let's say greenbacks in the United States. And unfortunately for them, caste has come to haunt them even in America.
Right.
Okay, so they thought that running away would be a solution. Now history is telling them that escapism is never a solution. You have to turn around and face this creature. Okay. Now you have the Cisco case going on in certain courts in America. Then you have caste being used to whip up Hinduphobia as well as Hindumissia. All of these things are happening. Okay. Now I'll tell you why I'll connect this to my previous point on the African American identity of Isabel Wilkerson. Is because when the BLM movement was going on and the BLM riots were going on, quite a few well-meaning, let's say, educated Hindu Americans were saying Hindus should express solidarity with African Americans because they're exactly going through what we are going through, but it's even worse because it's institutionalized. All that is fine. But my only question then was, do you realize that some of the pastors and padris who are sent to India are actually African Americans? Is that a question that you're willing to address? That the black churches of America export a significant number of missionaries to Indians,
Yes.
I mean to India.
Yeah.
My school, St. Anthony's High School, which is based out of Himayat Nagar, used to see a regular stream of African American missionaries from America.
Oh.
Okay. So there is a center in Hyderabad called the Muttangi Center, and which is a Christian center.
Mhm.
And that center, what they would do is that the African American missionaries would come. They would pass around gifts to students of the school, and they would try to look hip and cool and all that. And they would take these children to the Muttangi retreat for a week or so. These kids would go there for a week, come back abusing your own gods,
Yeah.
come back abusing, let's say, especially the Sabarimala tradition, because that used to, so those days in schools, you were allowed to wear the black dress and observe the 41-day Vrata in school and all that, despite it being a Christian school. Those children would be the first targets of these children who would come back from the retreats. This used to happen to 6th graders, 7th graders, 5th graders. Okay. I said, this is exactly what your so-called BLM movement exports to this country. Okay. So merely because you want me to get into the good books of African Americans and express solidarity, please don't treat us as equal victims, because he has now become a part of the oppressing community.
Right.
Okay. So much so that he's not fighting for the reclamation of his pre-Christian faith. He's fighting merely for equality as a black Christian American. Okay. That is what they've gone to. They want to see a black Jesus as opposed to asking why Jesus. Okay. So considering all of this, we don't need to necessarily express solidarity. We can only say perhaps the white Christian as well as the African American deserve each other at this point. Okay. And maybe let's see, hopefully something positive comes out of this, where the white Christian is forced to ask himself whether the civilizing project that he's undertaken all of the world is right. And the black Christian also asks himself whether by embracing the Christian identity, he's become part of a, let's say, an oppressive regime. Okay, let him start asking the question. Until then, I see no reason to simply jump on the bandwagon merely because I want to look politically cool, and on Instagram pages, I must basically say BLM matters, Black Lives Matter,
I know.
those things. Okay. So on this, there was really no response when I asked these questions of certain bleeding hearts. So the response that we should effectively evolve is twofold. One is serious scholarship is missing, or at least its dissemination is missing. Okay. A lot of people have come out with fantastic work, but ultimately, as I said, some of these works must enter active public discourse seriously, as opposed to being relegated to certain corners of libraries. Okay. Therefore, we need bridge scholars or simplified abridged versions of existing scholarship. That's important. And two, the Indian state needs to abandon the legacy of caste history that it has inherited from the British man and ask very hard questions. Because you see, one of the things that they don't want to discuss is those communities which were previously into the leather industry, the tanneries, and so on and so forth. Now they have been pushed to the societal margins, and that entire industry or the community has lost out to industrialization or the takeover of their traditional professions by Muslim communities in this country. Okay. Now that makes them extremely vulnerable to conversion. Okay. And then their histories will be reinvented to say that they converted because of Hindu oppression, not because of industrialization coupled with the takeover of their professions by Muslim communities. Okay. So the convenient punching bag again becomes the so-called caste system, as well as the Hindu community and the Savarna community. And for some weird reason, even the current dispensation at the center in Bharat seems to be pushing that stereotype, okay, as opposed to challenging it. Which is why I keep saying that you can't hope to create a civilizational vision on the backs of colonialized versions of your history. Okay. If you too fall back on the very same demonization of the Brahmin, and you too fall back on the very same demonization of so-called Brahminical institutions, then how are you different from the previous dispensation on this front? And effectively, it means that the Brahmin is the common object of hatred, and you don't realize how you are spewing venom on your own knowledge traditions. And that's exactly what I did in the first section of the book, where I show how bearers of knowledge traditions of Africa were singled out and slowly wiped out using similar strategies of race and whatnot, or inventing tribal fights. And I said that's exactly what happened there. And here, caste is the entire construct, or tribalism is the entire construct. And with such abundant scholarship from the West telling you the very same thing, how can you behave like an ostrich and behave and proceed to formulate policies which pushes the notion of caste even further, which entrenches it even further? So the second book of this trilogy will unpack the discussions surrounding caste, scheduled tribe, and reservations, which happened as part of the framing of the Constitution, to ask one simple question. Before these policies were put together through the medium of the Constitution, did they actually consider the fact that the versions of history that they were falling back on were versions of received wisdom, of European or Western experience of Bharat societies, okay, and not indigenous points of view? Did they consider that or not? I will certainly touch upon this as part of the book, okay? Because the idea is to say, what is the point of thinking of a response to the West when the first people to be addressed are within this country? Okay, we can keep responding to the West provided we at least have some semblance of uniformity in our positions on this. Okay, again, the very important clarification that I've given in the book, and it needs explaining here. I am not denying discrimination.
Yes.
I'm not denying the lived experience of people who have been treated as untouchables.
Yeah.
I'm not denying the fact that certain communities have been kept out of temples. I'm not denying the fact that somewhere the system, perhaps its rigidity, has come to its own detriment. I accept all of that. I'm merely going to ask myself this question: how much of that is a product of, let's say, external influence? How much of that is a direct product of what is purported to be the scriptural basis of it?
Yes.
Okay. How much of it can be directly attributed to the Purusha Suktam? How much of it can be directly attributed to the Manusmriti? These are questions that we must ask.
Yes.
In fact, to the extent I've also said this, I've had discussions on the Manusmriti with a lot of people who are traditionalists, who are, let's say, practitioners of Dharma in perhaps the most traditional form. And I don't use it in a negative way. I'm simply saying perhaps in the most pristine form. Even they say, one, Manusmriti is not law. Two, Manusmriti was not applicable to the entirety of this country because it's a diverse land. Three, it is not prescriptive, it is significantly descriptive, wherein it merely records the existing circumstances. And four, nobody says that all parts of Manusmriti is currently applicable, okay, or for that matter, Manusmriti has any contemporary relevance.
Yes.
To use one Smriti to bandy the entire civilization is so horrendous when you have so many Smritis.
And so much literature, so many texts, there is not one defining text or a text.
So somebody pointed this out to me, that the number of books that we have is much more than the table of contents of the one book that others have. Okay. So you can't use one Smriti to actually paint us all with the same brush. So I think there are multiple levels of responses, but the first institutional response that we must come out with is not negationism, but a decolonial objective approach to the system as it existed. Come out with that scholarship, accept its realities, and then think of a response to the West. Because an emotional response at this stage, because you believe that your civilization is under attack, is perhaps the worst possible response. Because it is an ill thought through response. There is no coherence, there is no articulation, there is no depth, there's no preparation. Okay. So when you're angry, especially on these aspects on a daily basis, take a deep breath and channel that anger to putting together something which is helpful in the longer battle or the longer war, as opposed to simply putting out 140 characters or 280 characters on Twitter.
True, I agree.
Please remember to subscribe to us and switch on the notifications for this channel. For our other social media links, more content, and to support our work, please visit citti.net. Dhanyavad. Namaskar.